Hi, my name is Ann Elliott. I'm the creator and founder of HomeschoolingTorah.com. I hope you'll grab a drink, pull up a chair, definitely grab your Bible and a thinking cap, because today we're going to talk about how to teach the basics of finance to our children. So it's a lesson in economics and what the Bible says about how everything in our world is working. This is session 1 of the last day of the 2022 Homeschool Family Conference. So, as a homeschool mom, you get the privilege of teaching math to your children. Yay! I think it's the #1 subject that parents are like, I don't want to teach that. I never was very good at it myself. And I'm not going to teach you how to do math in this video. Although I do hope you'll join us at Homeschooling Torah, because I'd love to help you. I actually would. But I'd like to teach you a little bit about why we teach math to our children and what the economy of the world is going through right now and how that affects us, and even big issues like how to manage your checkbook and how to not worry about all the stuff that's going on in our world and the economy and the recession that's happening and the gas prices and the food shortages and the wars in Russia and all of that stuff. We don't want to worry about that because we have a God who has a plan, and I want you to try to teach this plan to your children. So this is a fun one. I hope you'll hang with us. But even more than just hanging with us, I hope you'll take these principles and you'll go into the new school year, and as you're teaching math and you're doing the drudgery of adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing and algebra and geometry and all that stuff, I hope you'll apply it to things like a budget for your children and helping them purchase things at the store and figuring out how much money does it take to feed your family for an entire year. And if you were to grow all of that food yourself, how much would you have to do? Like how many plants would you have to plant and where would you put it up? And like the math problems would just be coming out of the woodwork. And so I think that would be so much better. Like that's real consumer math, teaching your children how to live in the everyday world. And then like all the preparation that we might have to do for hard times that are coming. I say might because I'm not exactly sure what's coming. It might be awesome what's coming. But either way, we want our children to be prepared and to have wisdom. One of the places that you can go for wisdom with your children when you're teaching them about math and finance is to go to the book of Proverbs. So I'm going to give you a really practical suggestion right off the bat before I get into like all the heady stuff that we're going to talk about today. And that is to read the book of Proverbs with your children every day. I recommend lunchtime because lunchtime is a great time to do it, and you don't even have to do the reading. You can go to BibleGateway.com, go down to one of the Bibles that has a free audio Bible like the NIV or the ESV, and click on that audio Bible and let them do the reading while you all munch on your lunch. So if there are in our Gregorian calendar 31 days in every one of those months, and I know that's not the biblical calendar, but it has been just a method I've used since I was a little girl, then there are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs, and you can read one chapter for every day of the Gregorian month. And I'm sure you could do that as well for the biblical month if you'd like to adapt it, and just once in a while you'll have to read 2 chapters to get it all in. But that would have you reading 1 chapter every day. And I would like to encourage you, as you read through it this next time, and maybe the next couple times, to take note of everything that the book of Proverbs says about finances and money and laziness and hard work and all of those things that go into it. Whoa, it's windy. And I would like you to make a big chart with your kids together. Chapter 1 said this thing. Chapter 2 said this thing. And like show that on the wall. And when you get all done, you guys are going to be so excited to see what you have learned about finances. So there's your super practical tip. I gave it to you right off the bat, and I hope that you'll do that. Come back and share under the video in a month from now and tell me what you've learned, because I would love to, snap a picture and email it to me. That'd be awesome. So what drives economics? What drives money? Why do we even have money in the first place? What is it needed for? Why can't we just skip it all together? Why do we even have to have math? So let's just dive into our Bibles for a second and get a little bit of look at history. We're going to go to the beginning of civilization, which is in Genesis chapter 4. And this is shortly after Yehovah created the world, made Adam and Eve in 6 literal 24-hour days. And then, of course, they had to have children, and those children had to grow up. So we're not talking like the first year or so. It's going to take time, just like it does for generations to go. But the second generation would have been Cain and Abel. And then, of course, there was a murder there. So we have Seth. And then you have generation after that and a generation after that. And it lists those out. Genesis chapter 5 actually names all of the different generations, told how long they lived, and it's really fascinating stuff. But if you go to Genesis 4, you go down to verse 16. Now, of course, Cain killed his brother Abel, and that was a horrific sin and murder. And Yah sent him out from where they were living together as a peaceful family unit, and he sent him out and to wander. And it says in verse 16, Cain went out from the presence of Yehovah and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he built a city, and he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot I'm going to say it in English, Mehujael, but I don't think that's how it is in Hebrew, just saying. And Mehujael begot Methushael, and Methushael begot Lamech. These names are so much fun, like we were talking earlier with phonics. And then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwelt in tents and have livestock. So how many generations? So we've got Cain and Abel. Well, actually, we've got Adam and Eve, then Cain and Abel. Then we've got Enoch, and then Enoch had a son named Irad, and Irad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begot Methushael, Methushael begot Lamech, and Lamech bore Jabal. So we are 8 generations from Adam. And those generations, let's say each one is 10 or 15, let's say probably realistically 15 to 20 years, maybe even 20 to 25. I don't know how long it was before they had children in that time. Maybe they were waiting longer than we do. I don't know. But if it were today, that's about how long it would be. So we've got 8 generations. You're talking several hundred years now. And now we have the first mention of a couple things. In 3rd generation, when baby Enoch was alive, or maybe was a young man, there was a city. That's the first city mentioned. And I doubt it was like what you're picturing a city, you know, as downtown New York City. No, it wasn't looking like that, but it was a dwelling where people probably was walled or had protection around it, because in the Hebrew, the word for city has that meaning of a protection around something. So at least it was the first civilized dwelling. Village is probably much more like it. But by the time you get to the 8th generation, you have organized livestock and those who dwell in tents. So almost like very much of a agriculture that is going to have to feed a lot of people. If you're going to have a tent city to have all of the people that you're employing to keep track of all that agriculture, all of that livestock. So it's a pretty big farming operation going on in the 8th one. And then his brother also was the first inventor of the harp and the flute. You have also, I don't know if it's their brother or stepbrother, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. So 8 generations after Adam and Eve, you have some pretty stinking awesome civilization going on. So how did we get there? What happened in those first 8 generations? Well, some fascinating things. I got this from an author of a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. It is not a Christian book. He does have an occasional swear word in there, or word I wouldn't use. But overall, I'm really enjoying reading it, and I don't agree with him and everything. He does not come at it from a perspective that he's reading the book of Genesis. He's evolutionary. But he brings up some fascinating things that would have been true, even though he's not reading it from a biblical perspective. For instance, he is noting that Adam and Eve, well, he didn't say Adam and Eve, but when the first people started farming, which would have been Adam and Eve, they didn't get to just survive. They had to use muscle. Muscle power was the beginning of civilization. Muscle is needed in order to do things. In a world where there's thorns and thistles and problems, you have to have muscles. Hard work or toil is how the Bible defines it. And this is going to be the place, it's going to take the form of a man having to use his own muscles, Okay, and men have big muscles, women have muscles. It's going to be people having to work very hard. It's going to take the form of their children and giving their muscles. But if they're anything like us, they're going to start to invent some things that make their life a little easier. So some simple machines such as a shovel or a pick. Okay, so like I'm imagining those might have been some of the first machines that I'm calling machine in a scientific way. You know, it's something that helps you reduce your physical labor. You're also going to use animal muscles. Animals like livestock are useful because they can pull a plow behind them, and that reduces the amount of muscle that a man has to use. So animals were awesome for that. I'm not sure that's why the Father originally created them, but they have great big muscles and can help us out. And then the fourth form of muscle energy that you can use is slaves. And maybe that took the form at first of just employing people and having servants and paying them. And I think it didn't take very long for them to actually have slaves where you force people to work for you. So those are the four forms of muscle that you can have. As they went on, and we know this from learning about civilization, and then much of our history, almost all of our history comes actually after the flood, when it's Shem, Ham, and Japheth that are doing this and having to reset up civilization. But I think it went much faster that time because they would have had the example of everything that they saw with their own eyes before the flood. So I don't think they had to reinvent the wheel at this point, literally, okay? So one of the first things they made was the use of a water wheel, okay? So they would use water muscle. The energy of water hitting a water wheel can really make civilization possible, because now you can grind flour and it opens up the possibilities of what you can have for food. If you're going to use water for muscle energy, for power, you're going to have to live close to water. So also you're going to need water for everything else. You're going to need water to irrigate your crops. You're going to need it for your animals and their food, and you're going to need it for yourself. So living by water was the first thing, and of course that gives the importance of geography to civilization. And you notice that great civilizations sprang up in places where there was water, such as the Euphrates River and the Nile River and around the Mediterranean Sea. The water wheels also made possible irrigation, which made possible larger areas of land for farming, which made the agriculture bigger, which made more animals available for muscles and for transportation, okay, because you can use a camel or whatever to get from one point to another. More land that's being irrigated with water, and the water wheels and such that you would use to irrigate it makes bigger yields. Pretty soon you have more yields coming from your gardens than you can eat as a family. And so then what is the natural thing? Well, then you're going to trade. Here, let me make this zucchini because I can make zucchini coming out of my ears while you grow the tomatoes, okay? I'm very oversimplifying this. And then let's trade. And as the first trade and bartering, I don't know when that happened, but it does mention gold in Genesis chapter 2, 3, and 4. I can't remember which chapter is specifically. I think it's chapter 2 that mentions gold. So very early, they knew about gold. And you would have the value of trading with one person, so not everybody has to do the same amount of work. With surpluses, you're going to have storage containers. So you're going to make pottery and other kinds of storage. You're going to use wood for furniture and for boxes and crates. You're going to need to have math, because you have to count all of this. If you're going to trade with your neighbor down the street, you need to make sure that they give you back the same value for what you gave them. So math is going to quickly become important, but you're also going to need math for engineering. And much of the first structures that were made besides houses were barns or silos, and they wouldn't have called them that, but like your granaries and places to store things. And we think of the time of Joseph, when for us, the coming famine, they stored so much grain, and they built the treasure troves of Egypt. Was the beginning of some of the greatest engineering feats and architecture that the world has ever seen. So, of course, you're going to have writing, you're going to have to keep records, and so on. And one of the really big pieces that came as civilization grew was roads, because to be able to transport the things that you're growing, you have to have a smooth surface. It takes a lot more muscle to move a cart over a bumpy ground than it does a smooth ground. And so muscle is the problem, right? Muscle, hard work, that's the curse. So things being so difficult. So we're going to try to smooth it out. Roads, the invention of roads made civilization boom and explode. And so, of course, as you're trading from one empire to another, the smaller civilizations around Egypt noticed the large amount of stored grains and agriculture that they had. And of course, now you have people attacking because they want to steal it. So now you're going to have to maintain an army, and you have to guard it. You're going to have to manage it. So you have your accountants and your clerks and scribes. You're going to have your shopkeepers and your merchants. And you're going to have education so that you can train your children up to manage the great wealth that you have acquired. And you're going to need government to keep all of this in the control of the person in charge, right? So I think of Nimrod in the famous city of Babylon. So with civilization comes war and theft, on and on. So you've got every single thing that we think of a civilization. And that's pretty much how the world maintains for quite a long time, and things do improve. During the time of King Solomon, his wealth was beyond believable at that time. Everyone came to visit and see how much was stored up in his civilization, because Yehovah prospered his hand in everything he did, and so the wealth was flowing in and out. And you know what is so interesting? I live in Michigan. Michigan is on the opposite side of the world from Israel, where Solomon was king. And yet, if you go up into northern Michigan, we have some mines, and copper mines. And in those mines, we have Hebrew inscriptions. And it's so cool because what they assume is that during the time of Solomon, some Hebrew-speaking merchants and traders and miners were up there and sending that copper back to very wealthy King Solomon. And I just love that. So you have such an incredible history, but all of it is based on the need for muscle and food and transportation. So a good, strong civilization needed solid borders around it to keep the enemies out. So a country like England, with a good, solid border of water around it and some good cliffs and such, easily defended against enemies trying to steal their things. So they became a stronger civilization than a country that didn't have any good borders and maybe was completely landlocked and no way. So you can see that, like, eventually you have China building a great wall so that they have a strong, definite border, and it's more easily defended. And you have, between all of the different civilizations and people groups, you have roads. And those roads have to cross either land, which is much more difficult to move things across land, even with wheels and smooth roads, than it is to go by water. Water is just so much easier. So a lot of the merchants of the earth traveled by water. And those trade routes, eventually you're going to discover coal and other great things that can be mined and burned. And as you burn those fossil fuels like coal, oil, eventually steel, and so on, you're going to make new inventions. And those new inventions, like take steel, take the railroad that goes by my house. You hear it in all my videos. That made a new smooth road that was even faster than water, definitely faster than going by wheel or cart or animal power, and burning the coal to take that steam train across those steel rails made the Industrial Revolution possible. So you can see that transport definitely made all of that happen. And the more the inventions came, and the more the countries and civilizations and towns and villages traded with each other, the less muscle power became necessary, and the more luxurious life becomes, the easier things are. And we're like, it's wonderful, here we are in 2022 and we have it all. Except we have a problem. We definitely have a problem. Over the last, when should I say? I'll just say 150 years, but the Industrial Revolution, as it's been happening, has created some issues. And these issues have happened because people have not gone into their Bibles, and they have not studied how to treat one another in a just and righteous way. But here are some of the things that happened. You have women's rights. Because, why did women's rights happen? Well, frankly, women oftentimes were not treated with the kindness and respect and cherishing that the Bible says that a wife should be treated with. Not respect so much as to be cherished and loved. Oftentimes they didn't feel like their job was fulfilling, just to have children and be stuck tending the home. But really, a lot of the issue wasn't because they felt they were missing something. but it was because they needed workers. There were world wars that decimated the male population, and women had to go in and try to keep things going, because transportation and trade between civilizations and towns and villages requires people. You have to have people to run the Industrial Revolution, and women were able to go in and fill those spots. But now, as women, for whatever reason, whether a good motive to help others, or a motive of selfishness sometimes, or a motive of not having love, no matter what the motive, there was a huge result. And the result was fewer children were born. All the way up until the 1900s, it was the average across the world for women to have 6 children, at least. That's the average. Many of them had more, some of them had less, but that was the average. And that burst of children filling the earth and multiplying, as God says in Genesis chapter 1, keeps everything growing and prospering. But unfortunately, with a collapsing birth rate, and the working classes getting older and older, and no skilled laborers to come in behind them, learning the jobs that they're doing, and getting those skills passed on to them, suddenly we have this massive machine of globalization where we can go into a store and there are 20,000 products available to us at any moment, but not enough workers to man the cashier aisles. So then they put in self-checkout. But there comes a point where more people are retiring than are being born. And there aren't going to be people to carry on the world. All of this, again, happened because people rejected the Bible. But as population decreases, there are fewer children, there are no workers, it becomes impossible to transport things. How will you do that? And how will civilization stay strong? So, one of the things that's fascinating, I just want to really briefly mention this, because I see this even as a curriculum author, and as we own our own company and we sell different curriculum supplies to all of you, we've noticed some things about the different generations. The generation that was purchasing our curriculum when we first started 9 years ago, and this is our 9th anniversary this week, yay! But the generation that was purchasing our curriculum when we first started would have been the older mothers of the Gen X generation. That's me. I'm a Gen X person. I was 39 years old when we started Homeschooling Torah, and at that point I had just graduated my oldest son from high school, and I have 7 children, so I still have kids in school now, but I'm a Gen Xer. And the way that we homeschool is very different from the generation that now most of my customers, most of you that are watching this video, are going to be firmly part of what's called the millennial generation. So let me tell you a little bit about these generations and how that fits into the economics that I'm talking about. The silent generation, 1928 to 1945, that's when people were born. So my mother was born in 1942, and she was born in the silent generation. It's called that for several reasons. One, they're the hardworking people that just do what they're told. Doggone it, they do what authority says. Children are seen and not heard, and they are strong generation, hardworking people. The next generation is the baby boomers. They were born right after World War II. So this would be 1946 to 1964. It's called the baby boomers because there were so many of them. So because there were so many children, of course, all of that industrialization that I'm talking about works because there are lots of workers. Of course, the silent generation was actually in the working force when the baby boomers were born. The generation before the silent generation are the parents of the baby boomers. The silent generation, meanwhile, grows up, and their children are the Gen X, Generation X. That's me. We were born between 1965 and 1980. I love it. If you are listening and you were born in the time of the baby boomers, or hey, maybe we even have some from the silent generation, tell me, say, it's me, I'm one of those, so I can see how many we have. But I'm guessing there are a few of you that are Gen Xers who were born from 1965 to 1980. And I guess it was named from some song that was written in the 70s. And it's talking about people that want off the carousel of life. They're tired of the hypocrisy that they saw from, all of the social revolutions that were happening in the 1960s and 70s in at least America. And these are all based on the United States. Even though they're called this all around the world, the United States really is where they get their name. So then at 1981 to 1996, you have the millennials, and they get their name millennial because they were graduating from high school right around the turn of the century, right around the millennium. So for instance, if someone was born in 1982, they would be a millennial, and they would graduate from high school in the year 2000. So some of them, like if you have a 1996 baby, put in the millennials, they're not going to graduate in the year 2000, but they still kind of group them because around the year 1996, so many inventions boomed, specifically the internet, that they just call it a new generation after that. So that's kind of where the end of the millennials are, is when the internet was invented. The internet was invented when these were very small children. Of course, they grew up using it, and so this marks the difference. This Gen X generation, like me, we learned the internet as teenagers and young adults. But the millennials, they've known it their whole lives. That's all they've known. They've known it literally from the time they were in elementary school. They were children, and they were touching and working with computers the entire time. So you can see, for someone like me, as I talk to my customers, the moms who are now teaching their kids, some of my customers are not good with technology, and so they are like, please give me a printed book. I don't even know how to use it. But most of the time, the millennial generation is very good with technology, and they don't have a problem with it. It's just very much a stereotype, okay? It's not all true. I mean, for instance, my dad loved computers. We had a computer in the home in 1984, a Radio Shack TRS-80, for those of you who are old enough to know what that is. So I was in 4th grade in 1984, and we got our first computer. So I have a little bit of a millennial bent myself because I've been using a computer so long. But the baby boomers, they didn't grow up with any of that. And the silent generation, like my mother, not at all. So then, of course, you have the children that are being homeschooled right now that are in their teenage years, and these are maybe young adults. These were born from 1997 to about 2011, and there's some differences of where we end that, depending on who you talk to. But these are the children, they call them Zoomers. I'm not sure why, but probably because they're on their social media and their device, they're zooming around with that all the time. So the difference between a millennial parent, which is probably most of you that are listening, and a Zoomer is the Zoomers literally, that's like they eat, breathe, and sleep with devices for most of the kids in the world. And then you have the Alpha generation, and these are the children born from 2012 till still being born, maybe up to 2025 or so. They call them the Alpha generation. I'm not exactly sure what name they're going to actually get stuck with, like baby boomers or whatever. Maybe that's what they'll be ended with. But these are the people that are living in a new world, a new normal, and this is going to be the COVID generation, the generation that COVID was all they remember. And so you can imagine the differences between these generations, but you can see as you go from the silent to the baby boomers to the Gen Xers to the millennials to the Zoomers, did I miss any? To the Alpha generation that's coming up now, the COVID generation, you can see how much women's rights have become an issue. You can see the collapsing birth rate. In fact, there was one comment I read online about the millennials, and that is that it's a miracle that they exist at all because of abortion and birth control. It's a miracle. You have increased globalization at an astonishing rate as you go through these last generations. And you have a decrease of population around the world. There are only a handful of countries in the world right now where population has not decreased. So that brings an economic nightmare on the horizon. And you have to say to yourself, what is going to happen? We do not have the people, first of all, to handle all of the technology that we have. And second of all, even if we had the people, we don't have the skilled people. They don't have skills because they're so used to their devices. They have not learned character. They have not learned how to have strong, stable families, and they haven't learned how to do basic math and science. How are they going to maintain the technology of our world? So I'm going to read to you what the Bible says is coming in the future. So when we go to Revelation chapter 18, I'm just going to read some of these verses and give you an idea. I think you're going to see it jump right off the page at you. It's so obvious what's going to happen. It says in Revelation 18, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon, which is a city, the great is fallen, is fallen and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. All the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Well, that's right. Sounded like where we are, isn't it? Let's go down to verse 9 and see what God says is going to happen. He says, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour, quickly, your judgment has come. It says, I'll keep going, verse 11, and the merchants of the earth, as this economy falls, will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver. You should, when I'm reading this right now, I want you to think about the shortages going on in the world and kind of put a check in your mind next to each one that's happening. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, that's furniture wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of the most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and the bodies and souls of men. And we are right back to early days of the earth, when all of those things were invented and have been increasing and increasing and increasing, and the merchants of the earth have been sending them from one point to another, and civilizations are growing, and the judgment of God is going to bring it right back down to where it was at the beginning. Let me go down to verse 17. It says, in 1 hour such great riches come to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what is like this great city? If we go 19, it talks again about all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. What about verse 22? The great city Babylon will be thrown down and shall not be found anymore, and the sound of harpists. We're back. Do you remember what I was saying? The first people, 8 generations after Adam, they invented music. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you anymore. And the sound of a millstone. Remember I talked about water wheels, making the first grinding things that you didn't have to use your own muscles for flour, and you could transport flour around the world. But the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you anymore. And so on. That's what's coming, because the Bible says it's going to happen. And that is going to be an incredible day. But in the meantime, in the scriptures, it talks about his people, Israel, when he brings them back and calls them back to his land. He whistles for them, and from the uttermost parts of the earth, he brings them back to his land. How the wealth of the nations shall flow into her, and she's going to be strong. Now, what would make her strong? Why? Is it just because he's going to snap his fingers and make this miracle happen? Well, if these people are living by his Torah, then they would have strong marriages, and they would have a strong family structure. And if you have a strong marriage and a strong family structure, you're going to be able to support children. And as you have children, you increase in population. And as you increase in population, you have strong communities and strong cities that are built on justice and righteousness. You see, these are not just principles. As we read all these things, the Torah is not just full of principles. It's full of things that we can actually take action on. Let me read to you some of the things that God says about how he thinks cities should be built and the kind of justice that they should have. If we go to Numbers 35, it says, let me see. I'm going to go to verse 2. Command the children of Israel that they give the Levites cities to dwell in. So he can't have a problem with the actual concept of a city, right? It could be more like a village, I'll be honest. But a place of protection with walls around it. He says, give them cities to dwell in from the inheritance of their possession, and you shall also give the Levites common land around the cities. They shall have the cities to dwell in, and their common land shall be for their cattle, for their herds, and for all their animals. And he tells how far it's supposed to extend on each side of the city. That common land for gardening and for agriculture and for livestock. So those things can't be the problem. It's not capitalism that is causing the problem in our society, because God himself commands it. And in fact, let's go to Deuteronomy 28. And I read the blessings that he gives to his people, which are going to come on us as we come back to the land and we start to walk in obedience to his Torah. Here are the things that are going to happen to us. It says, "Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of Yehovah your Elohim, to observe carefully all his commandments which I command you today, that Yehovah your Elohim will set you high above all the nations of the earth." So there are still nations. He's going to set us higher than them. "And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of Yehovah your Elohim. Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the country." Both of those are good and a blessed place to be. "Blessed shall be the fruit of your body," that's our children, "and the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, and the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks." So animals galore, our livestock doing well, our farms prospering. It says, "Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl." Our food is going to be blessed and probably good for us too. "Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. And Yehovah will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face." So instead of needing to have our own armies to defend us from all the people trying to steal our wealth, Yehovah himself will guard us from our enemies. Down in verse 8, "Yehovah will command the blessing on you in your storehouses." That's your barns. That's your big factories and industrial warehouses, and in all which you set your hand to. "And he will bless you in the land which Yehovah your Elohim is giving you." Yehovah will establish you as a holy, a set-apart people to himself, just as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of Yehovah your Elohim and walk in his ways. "Then all people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yehovah, and they shall be afraid of you. And Yehovah will grant you plenty of goods, in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock," he's doing it again, "in the produce of your ground, in the land which Yehovah swore to your fathers to give you." So this is an actual place that he's going to take us to, and he's going to do all these wonderful things for us. "And Yehovah will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give you the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands." So no drought, nothing like happened to Pharaoh. "And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, because we won't need to. And Yehovah will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not be beneath, if you heed the commandments of Yehovah your Elohim, which I command you today, and are careful to observe them. So you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them." So this is what we have coming to us. I'm imagining that we would have food and livestock, capital and not debt. We would be able to support children. And you know what? One of the reasons that people don't want to have kids is because kids are often little brats and not obedient and very greedy, and they aren't useful. They don't help around the house. So how in the world would you ever have a farm? If you had 7, 8, 9 children and they were all naughty, then you would just be so overwhelmed with life. But his Torah talks about how to teach our children to be righteous and honoring to their parents, and to be hard workers and industrial, and that everything that they touch with their hands prospers. And who wouldn't want to have kids when that's going on? Instead of consumerism, you would have a beneficial, rich economy where everyone helps one another and is not greedy but takes care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. You would have well-behaved children. They would have healthy children. That's so amazing to me that health is promised in that. Instead of having sickness, honestly, a lot of the reasons some moms don't want to have children is because they just get sick so bad when they're pregnant. Why would they want to keep having more? But in the time of his kingdom, it's not going to be like that. And so that one economy of his set-apart nation is going to prosper, while meanwhile Babylon is falling and the shipmasters are crying and the merchants don't know what to do and they're wringing their hands because they're falling to the tail. While Israel, his people, his godly Torah observant, Yeshua loving people, rise to the head. So, a godly economy supports food and livestock. And as you teach your children about finances and how to make a budget and how to do their math and their consumer math, you need to teach them how to handle their food and possibly livestock. You can start with taking care of kittens and puppies, but it's awesome to go on to animals that can actually provide food for us. My husband is making the plans to start that for our family. This is not something that we grew up doing. We're city kids. But we're going to get a chicken tractor, and we're going to put some chickens in it and get the eggs, and it's all going to be a new path for us. But we already have a farmer that we can go with and trade and get some raw milk for our family and some good beef for our freezer. So those are some things that we have available to us, and you need to teach your children the economics of how a godly society is run. We also need to teach our children to support capitalism and not debt. How would your children ever be blessed and prosperous if they're burdened under a heavy load of debt, from student loans to going to college to all kinds of debt, because we don't wait to buy the things that we want. We aren't willing to wait a little bit of time. We have to have it today. We need to teach our children, when they make their budget, to set aside a savings so that they don't have to have that debt. We want to be the head and not the tail. We want to teach our children how to support children of their own. So as our children are getting into the teenage years and thinking towards a career, what is a thing that they can do that would support not only paying for children and a home for them to live in, but would also allow the man to be with his children and his wife as much as possible? Like, these are Torah principles, and I don't have all the answers. I'm just saying, as you teach children math, start them young on thinking like a citizen of God's kingdom. Teach your children how to care for the community, because the city is not the problem. Again, I'm going to go to Revelation chapter 21, and I'm going to point out a very important city. In Revelation 21, verse 1, it says, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea." Remember I said that they had to have water to transport things? I could think about that, and it just, wow, mind blown. It'll be a totally different world. But he says, "I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." So there's a city, and it has walls and a foundation, it has gates. The problem isn't the city. The interesting thing about that city is that it has walls and a foundation and gates. In other words, it's not necessarily free trade from one civilization to another where everything is greed driven, but it's a city that has gates and walls. And if you think back to Deuteronomy chapter 6, this verse that we quote all the time, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to, it says, "These words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." Here it is. "You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts," the gates of your house, "and on your gates." In other words, our home is like a picture of what his civilization is going to be like. It is a civilization that has law and order and gates, and it keeps out the fornicator and the idolater and the liar and all of the rebellious people who don't want to walk in his Torah. They are kept out, and they are not allowed entry into that city. So it's not free trade, but Torah observant trade, Torah-based trade with only those who will be obedient. It says in Isaiah 66 that if any nation will not come up and obey him to come up for Sukkot every year, the Feast of Tabernacles, that he won't give them any rain. So how will they be able to trade food? So only those who are obedient to his Torah will be able to be blessed. The interesting thing about that city is the temple, the sanctuary is at its center. Now I'm going to flip over. There's several chapters about the city in Ezekiel chapter 43, and actually in chapter 40 all the way to the end of the book. And I'm not going to go through all of that, but I just want to point out a couple verses. Ezekiel 43 verses 5 through 7, it says, "The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of Yehovah filled the temple. And I heard him speaking to me from the temple, while a man stood beside me. And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. No more shall the house of Israel defile my name, nor they nor their kings, by their harlotry, or with the carcasses of their kings on their high places. So he is going to have his holy and pure and clean dwelling place in the center of his people. And what that means to me is that his worshiping him in his prescribed way according to his Torah, is the center of a godly and amazing, prosperous population and civilization. I mean, if we don't have his worship at the center of everything we do, then how can we expect to be blessed? We're going to be doomed with Babylon to destruction. So in your home, you need to have his holy worship the center of everything you do. That means that you rest on the Sabbath day, that money does not come first, your job does not come first, that even in harvest time, as it says in the Torah, we stop and we rest. That means that the feasts are incredibly important, that his worship has got to be the center. It means we teach our children about our King, Yeshua, and we make sure that they worship him only. We make sure that everything we do is centered on him. He is at the center, and he dwells among us, and he is holy. He will not have anything to do with idolatry. So we get anything idolatrous, pagan, and wicked out of our homes. We restrict the entry to the city. I think I already said that, but in Isaiah 44 verses 5 through 9, it talks about making sure that everyone who enters the house has a mark on them, that they are in obedience to the Torah, and they're circumcised in their heart, and that they don't break his covenant and do any abominations. They carefully guard his Torah. It says in 44 verse 23 that those people will be well taught in how to keep the Torah. It says they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the unholy, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. And in controversy they shall stand as judges, and judge according to my judgments. And they shall guard my laws and my statutes in all my appointed times, and they shall keep holy my Sabbaths. So they're lawful. They know how to keep the Torah. They're discerning. And then here's another one. If I go over to chapter 46, oh my goodness, I could just keep going. Oh no, let me do this one. 45 verses 9 and 10. This one's really important. He says, remove violence and plundering. Does this sound like our culture? Execute justice and righteousness, and stop dispossessing my people. You shall have honest scales, an honest ephah, and an honest bath. And those are measurements of weight, so that when they were doing their trade from one civilization to another, they would fudge the scales sometimes and say that something weighed a little less than it actually did, and not have to pay full price for it. But that is against his Torah. And he says in his city, everything is going to be fair and just and honest, including the trade. No paying for something you're not actually getting what it's valued at. And he goes and explains what the value of that money will be. If we go over to 46, verse 18, it says, moreover, the prince shall not take any of the people's inheritance by evicting them from their property. He talks about none of my people will be scattered from his own property. So property management is incredibly important. And one of the ways you can teach that in your home is by teaching the importance of valuing the property of other people. One of the reasons you don't let your child eat their peanut butter and jelly sandwich on top of an expensive rug is because that is a piece of property from somebody. And how would a small little child pay for that expensive rug? No, that's not valuing their property. And the prince who rules at that time will never evict someone from their property or steal from them their property. So don't let your children take the property of somebody else. No, that's not, it's not about sharing. We should share out of the goodness of our heart, but the property still belongs to us. We should not hurt someone else's property. It is valuable. We need to be just and righteous in our homes and in our families. Let me go down to 47 verse 21. It says, this is how you will divide the land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. And he goes through about dividing by lot all of the things in their inheritance, so everybody gets a fair share. And that's a cool thing for a mom to do, as she's trying to be fair and just and equitable in her home, is use a pair of dice or flip a coin or draw straws or something and let God determine with a lot, and be fair about it. Don't give the best thing to your favorite child. Don't give the only, make things fair and just like the land is divided up. Let's go over to 47 verse 12. It says, along the banks of the river that flows out of that city I was talking about, on this side and that will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail, and they will bear fruit every month, because their water flows from the sanctuary, and their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for medicine. I'm so amazed by how pharmaceuticals will be gone, and instead we'll be using the leaves and the trees and the fruit that he created as our nutrition and our health. And that's just a whole nother topic, but it's just a good pattern for when we're trying to figure out the economics of paying for a family and coming up with a food budget and all of these things. We need to think about the fact that getting good food is a priority if we could all do it. So each city also has the land to cultivate their food, like we already mentioned from the book of Numbers. It's mentioned again in Ezekiel 48 verse 19, and it says, the workers of the city from all the tribes of Israel shall cultivate the land that's around the city. And then it starts to say how much land will be given to cultivate. So you've got your livestock and your garden area and your farming and all of it right around the city, supporting that city, so that if something happens and they cannot trade with another city, they're self-sufficient and they have what they need right there. Not saying it's wrong to trade, but they are also each sufficient themselves to be able to feed the people that are in their cities, which is such a cool thing. And it also mentions in the book of Ezekiel, talks about them going up for the feasts and celebrating all of his appointed times. And that is a pattern for how we're to be. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 8, I think I'll go down to verse 10. It says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, into your barn, that there may be food in my house. And test me in this, says Yehovah of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. He's talking about tithes there, but those tithes aren't something that we write a check out to our local church. That's not what it's talking about. Those tithes were meant to be traveling up to his city 3 times a year to celebrate the feast. And while there, you took money up and you gave it to the teachers, the Levites, and the priests. You also helped the widows and the orphans and the poor. But notice that it's very much centered around his calendar and his feasts. And we should be setting aside money to make his feast a priority in our family. So have your children help you. Draw a budget and try to stick to it. Are you setting aside 1/10 of your income to help those who teach you, to help the poor and the widows, but also to celebrate the feast? That's so important. So all of these things are how his economic system works. It's fair and just, and we keep his worship at the center, and we take care of the community, and we are self-sufficient, but yet we also can trade and barter because we are going to be at the top and not the tail. It's just an incredible system. Having lots of children, having children that are not just lots of them, but are well behaved and righteous and honoring to their parents and hard workers and smart and able to take care of the technology and the entire world, to basically be in charge. And it talks about in Revelation how there'll be 12 thrones and 12 judges. So that's basically saying that the 12 tribes will be parceled out to take care of the economy of the entire rest of the world. Can you imagine this? This blows my mind. This is not the economy that I was taught when I was in high school and learned about government and economics. And I think what I learned was good, but I liked learning it. Like, how would the Torah do it? How would it be in his kingdom if we were there? What would that be like? So as you study, as you learn history, as you learn science, well, let's talk about history. As you learn history and you see little tidbits of economics and trade and civilization being built up and wars being fought, compare that to the Torah and find out, how is it different? How is it the same? And give your children that firm foundation of economics. Okay? If you don't know how to do that, hang with us at Homeschooling Torah, because we are building new materials all the time to help you with that. What about science? Your children need to have a firm base in math and science, because we're going to be in charge of the world. If there were no people that were wicked and ungodly running Silicon Valley and all of the internet sites, and I'm not going to name their names, then who would? Who would run them, and who would do it in a fair and equitable and righteous and just way? Those are the things we need to train up our children to do. So the basics of finance and the basics of economics are justice and righteousness and caring for the widow and the poor. Let's just finish this out by going to Isaiah 58. And in this first part of the chapter, he's telling them about the things they've done wrong, and these things they ring true in our society and our culture in finance and economics. For instance, he says, let's go down to the end of verse 3. It says, in the day of your fast, or while you're trying to act holy and righteous and pretend to go to church and do all the things that are worshiping God, in that day you're finding pleasure in exploiting your laborers, and you fast for strife and debate, and you strike with the fist of wickedness. Basically, at the very moment they were trying to act righteous and holy, they were exploiting people. And that is what our culture and civilization is most often built on. But he go down to verse 6, he says, is not this the fast, or the kind of worship that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke. I mean, that's what Yeshua did. But we're supposed to act like that too. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? You bring to your house the poor who are cast out, and when you see the naked, that you cover them, and hide not yourself from your own flesh. And if you do these things, then your light will break forth like the morning, and your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of Yehovah shall be your rear guard. And you shall call, and Yehovah will answer, and you will cry, and he will say, here I am. And so then he talks about take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, and extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul. Then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. And Yehovah will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought, in a recession. He's got you if you care for others. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. In the hardest of times, he's like, I'm going to call you from the ends of the earth, and I'm going to bring you back. But here's what you have to do. You have to act righteously and justly. You have to care for the poor. And this is the basics of finance and economics. And this is what you need to teach to your children and model for them in your own behavior. And he says, those from among you, in verse 12, shall build up the old waste places, and you shall raise up the foundations of many generations. I love that verse. That's why we're called Foundations Press. And you shall be called the repairer of the breach and the restorer of streets to dwell in. And if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, in other words, if you turn away, you're running around doing your own business on my day that I asked you to rest and to congregate and have a holy convocation and learn about me. And instead of doing that, why don't you call the Sabbath a delight, a holy day of Yehovah, honorable? And honor him, not doing your own ways, and nor finding your own pleasure, meaning your own business, filling up your own bank account on that one day, nor speaking your own words. Then you shall delight yourself in Yehovah, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of Yehovah is spoken. That chapter is full of economics. That is the basics of finance. And yes, we need to teach our children all of the things, all the consumer math, all of the budgeting, and all of the ways to handle their money and work for it, and rewards and saving and interest and debt and mortgages and so on and so on and so on. But really what we need to teach them is the heart of it, which is justice and righteousness and taking care of others. And if we took care of that, all the other things would take care of themselves. So just as we started this week by talking about his kingdom and what it will be like, I really want you to think this school year about how to apply that to the math and the science, and what you do in the afternoons with your free time, and how you take care of people even when you might be tired, and think about his kingdom and what his economy is going to be like. And when you're out at the grocery store with your kids, you can point out, say, hey, that looks a lot like Revelation 18. Wow, that is listed on the list, and it says there's going to be a shortage of it, and look at that. There it is. It's not there. My kids and I went to Joann Fabric recently to get some material for a beautiful dress that my daughter's making. She's a senior in high school, and she wants to make this beautiful dress. And she's done it with her own money, and she's learned how to sew. And so she went to buy the fabric, but like it listed in Revelation 18, the very nice fabrics are stuck on ships somewhere, and they're not getting to the store shelves. And just like the shipmasters are crying, my daughter was like, oh no. And even while I've been recording this video, she's in the house on the internet trying to figure out where she could purchase some nice fabric and get some shipmaster to ship it to our house so she can make this special dress. I don't know if she'll be able to or not, but it's so fascinating to have those conversations with my children and say, it's happening just like he said it would happen. Hang on, because I also know what's coming. And as we do what the Torah says, he's going to raise us as a people up to be the leaders of the world and not the bottom. Right now, most of us are at the bottom. But he's going to raise us up, and he's going to make us into a culture that is right and just and is doing things the way he always intended it to be from the garden. He's going to fix the curse. And he's going to use our generations, the Gen Xers and the Millennials and the Zoomers and the Alphas. He's going to use us to be the ones that set up his economy and bring it to pass. That gives me goosebumps. But we have to get in the Word. We have to know what it says. We have to read our Torah. We have to apply it to our situation, to our house. And we have to make sure our children are well taught. I hope I've given you some basic principles for that. And I hope that you will treasure his Torah above all things, that it be the delight of your eyes. It's sweeter than honey, and it's richer than gold. It is everything we need for life and godliness. And it is the foundation of finance and economics. Do we believe it? Do we believe it enough to act like that? I hope so. Shalom.
Man cannot live by bread alone. He needs something stronger to feed his hungry soul. So he'll try everything under the sun, but nothing will end his hunger, nothing but your love. He'll acquire treasure, but it won't amount to much. He'll fall in love with pleasure, but none will fill him up. And when he has exhausted all this world could give to him, still he'll not grow weary of chasing after the wind. Oh, man cannot live by bread alone. He needs something stronger to feed his hungry soul. So he'll try everything under the sun, but nothing will end his hunger, nothing but your love. I looked in the mirror just the other day. I was so surprised, I hardly recognized the change. So restless and so hurried, I've spent so much time running after things I'm gonna have to leave behind. Oh, man, yeah. Try everything, but nothing will end his hunger. Man cannot live by bread alone. He needs something stronger to feed his hungry soul. So he'll try everything under the sun. Nothing will end his hunger, nothing but your love. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He needs something stronger, nothing but your love. So he'll try everything under the sun, but nothing will by bread alone. He needs something stronger. So he'll try everything under the sun.